On August 10, 1960, a captain in the Royal Lao Army led a military coup in the capital city of the Kingdom of Laos. This captain was named Kong Lei, a soldier that was fed up with the foreign influence that was consuming the newly established nation. Upon the overthrow of the rightist government under the Committee for the Defense of National Interests in Vientiane, Kong Lei formed a neutralist government for Laos. However, it soon became unacceptable for the Americans as the neutralist faction began to build closer ties with the communists. Kong Lei's faction were soon accepting supplies and economic aid from the Soviet Union and North Vietnam. In the countryside, as Kong Lei and the neutralist government were trying to restart the levers of government, the communists went on the offensive and took over larger parts of Laos. By the end of 1960, the rightist faction with support from the American CIA launched an attack from the south and took over the city of Vientiane. Kong Lei and his forces. Kong Lei and his fellow neutralist commanders fled up north along Colonial Route 13. The rightist faction, fearing that the neutralists were going to attack the Royal Lao capital of Long Cheng in the north, reinforced their garrisons protecting Colonial Route 13. In an unexpected turn of events, the neutralists, upon reaching the city of Salapukun at the intersection of Colonial Route 13 and Colonial Route 7, instead of continuing north as the royalists expected, Kong Lei's forces turned east towards the Plain of Jars, in an effort to link up with their new allies, the communists that were converging on the Plain of Jars. As the neutralist forces of Kong Lei and Captain Kensana moved from Salapukun towards the town of Mong Sui, a Hmong commander named Lieutenant An Sao, under orders from Lieutenant General Vang Pao, had set up landmines along Colonial Route 7 to slow down the neutralist advance. While Kong Lei and the neutralists were pushing from the western edge of the Plain of Jars, the communist offensive from the eastern side of the Plain of Jars were ratcheting up. At the mountain of Pusan, Hmong chieftain Mo Tzopo, soon to be known as the famed Northern Warrior, would take his clansman and son, the future Colonel Mo Su, north to rally at the soon-to-be famous Hmong military base of Buon Lo. Other refugees and civilians at Pusan would follow Tu Nung Mo, son of the late Hmong Cao Mong Zhong Po Mo, and meet up with Lieutenant Colonel Vang Pao on the Plain of Jars. With Soviet weaponry and support, the neutralists overwhelmed the Hmong Royal Lao soldiers and gradually entered the heartland of the Plain of Jars. By New Year's Eve of 1960, the neutralists and communists had taken over the major portions of the Plain of Jars. Lieutenant Colonel Vang Pao, the Hmong commander of the Royal Lao forces stationed at Hanghai, fled south with the local Lao government officials, civilians, and a Lao infantry battalion, the BI-10 battalion. The neutralists and communists, seeing that the Royal Lao government officials and Lieutenant Colonel Vang Pao were the only remaining forces capable of launching a counteroffensive, went on hot pursuit. With ground support from the Pathet Lao and North Vietnamese army, the neutralists dislodged the defenses set up by Vang Pao and the 200-strong Hmong forces. Captain Kong Lei pushed on from Pong Savat and expelled Lieutenant Colonel Vang Pao's forces from the provincial capital city of Siem Kho. All rightist Royal Lao forces were kicked out from the Plain of Jars by the turn of the new year. More and more communist forces entered onto the Plain of Jars from Siem Nep province and Vietnam. Captain Kong Lei and the communists moved down from the Plain of Jars to crush the fleeing Royal Lao forces heading south towards the town of Ta Bien. Just as Lieutenant Colonel Vang Pao and the Royal Lao forces were at their lowest point, reeling from the attacks by the combined forces of the neutralists and communists. In neighboring Thailand, a CIA operative by the name Belair was watching the fighting inside of Laos, hearing from Hmong Thai locals in Thailand about a charismatic Hmong soldier named Vang Pao. Belair decided to search out this anti-communist leader inside of Laos. From Thailand, Belair with Thai Peru Colonel Pranet flew into Laos searching for Vang Pao's fleeing forces. Belair and Colonel Pranet eventually landed in the village of Tang Khai and met with a local Hmong Taseng or sub-district chief by the name of Juatong Ya. With Taseng Juatong Ya's guides, Colonel Pranet set off south to look out for Vang Pao while Belair flew back to Thailand. The next day, Colonel Pranet radioed Belair from where he had made contact with Vang Pao. Belair immediately flew to Ta Viet to meet Vang Pao. Upon meeting with Vang Pao and the Hmong, serious negotiations began, and Belair offered America's assistance to the Hmong in fighting off the communist invasion of Laos. Sizing up Vang Pao, Belair found a staunch and proud Hmong commander in Vang Pao. The Hmong leader talked of the injustices his fellow Hmong had to endure at the hands of the communists since the French had left Indochina. Vang Pao informed Belair that he would call up 10,000 Hmong warriors if America was willing to help. As the Hmong and Royal Lao forces were holed up at Ca Viet, before negotiations was finalized, the neutralists and communists launched a major attack against Ta Viet on January 13, 1961. Fearing of encirclement, the ethnic Lao soldiers talked of fleeing further south to link up with rightist leaders in Savannah Cat. Upon meeting Belair, Vang Pao decided to stay and fight while the Lao government officials made their way further south. With the US government's approval of support for the creation of a secret Hmong army in Laos, new Thai Peru advisors arrived in Laos to train the Hmong. Vang Pao and the Hmong relocated west to set up a drop zone base at the mountain town of Padong. 3 days, Vang Pao had told Perong Belair. 3 days before the enemy would uncrawling and attack once they saw the airdrops. The new Hmong base at Padong would become Lima Site 5. From Padong, Vang Pao would plant the seed for the future secret Hmong army inside of Laos, the backbone for the overall defense against the communist invasion of Laos. From Padong, Hmong warriors flowed in from the villages surrounding the Plain of Jars, and the Thai Peru advisors began a crash course military training program. The CIA then began Operation Momentum, or the creation of momentum sites around the Plain of Jars to gather dispersed Hmong refugees and soldiers for training and resupply. From these momentum sites, the Hmong will launch raids on the communist positions on the Plain of Jars and cut off the flow of arms and soldiers from Vietnam along Colonial Route 7. Soon, with preliminary training complete, the first two Hmong ABC or Auto de Choc companies graduated and launched their first effective raid against the communists south of Siem Kong City. The Hmong were successful in defeating a much larger communist force, bringing credence to the confidence of American strategists in the new Hmong army. From February to March 1961, as news of Vang Pao's new army spread, more and more Hmong volunteers flocked to the 7 momentum sites around the Plain of Jars. The North Vietnamese army, now pushing aside Cong Le's neutralists, took over the initiative to crush the new Hmong army. In mid-March 1961, a major North Vietnamese army with 5 Pathet Lao companies launched an offensive against Lima Site 1, the Hmong momentum site at Mong Na, commanded by Captain Jova Lee. The CIA advisors watched on as the Hmong and fellow Khmer volunteers fought on valiantly against tremendous odds. The site was eventually overran by overwhelming and well-trained North Vietnamese veterans. Before the end of March, massive attacks would continue, beginning with the San Teo momentum site at the crossroads of Colonial Route 6 and Colonial Route 7. Captain Choi Ya's forces were overwhelmed and they abandoned the site, staying true to the guerrilla tactics passed on by the CIA advisors. They would rally later further south at a new Hmong base at Mong Mok teaming up with the local forces with Dasing Zhong Xingwu and his son Lieutenant Zhong Guovu. Next up, before the close of March, the momentum site at Talinoy was attacked, and Dasing Zhuo Boya stuck with a substantial number of civilians and fled south before the site was overtaken by the combined forces of Pathet Lao and North Vietnamese. With the eastern momentum sites taken out, a massive North Vietnamese regiment gathered on the Plain of Jars under the command of Major Lo Van Pao. This force was known as the 148th Regiment. It launched a major and relentless attack on Padong on June 6, 1961, breaking the June 4th Geneva Conference truce that was supposed to be in place since May. Vang Pao and the Padong Hmong defenders, both military and civilians, fought on against continuous artillery barrages, human waves of North Vietnamese attackers. With advice from the resident CIA advisors, many whom the US government did not want to see captured, Vang Pao relocated his headquarters from Padong south to Pha Khao. From Pha Khao, Lieutenant Colonel Vang Pao would gather more men and prepared his Hmong forces for more raids against the North Vietnamese and Pathet Lao along Colonial Road 7. The CIA, along with the US Army, began a more advanced training program in the southern villages of Mong Pun and Mung Pun. As 1962 rolled around, the on and off fighting continued around the Plain of Jars, and the North Vietnamese army prepared for another round of major offensives. As the war raged on in the eastern momentum sites, Pha Khao was soon overflowing with refugees. Another truce was signed in August 1962 by the politicians, and it did nothing but allow the communists time to regather for another major attack on the Hmong. However, Vang Pao and the Hmong did not wait, but was able to recapture Padong and several momentum sites back from the communists. With the overflowing issues at Pha Khao and the indefensibility of Padong, Vang Pao decided to finally relocate to a better defensible site at Long Cheng, which was codenamed Lima Site 30, but to confuse the enemy, American pilots would codename the new Hmong headquarters as Lima Site 20 alternate. From Long Cheng, or LS-20A, Vang Pao and the Hmong would escalate their attack against the communists and push back the enemy to the border of Vietnam. Long Cheng would enter into a new chapter of Hmong history, becoming the busiest airport in all of Asia, and unofficially the second largest city in Laos. And with this, we close our part 1 of our Hmong history series detailing the secret war in Laos. Thank you. Please like and subscribe and support our channel.